Hanson, engage.
I have to answer that question.
I'll answer the question. You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Give us some men who know the truth. And who will declare the truth. And who will stand with Athanasius and Polycarp and Calvin and Luther and Whitefield and Edwards, and who will declare from the housetops that the gospel is the power of God unto salvation.
But it's been so entrenched that there's no such thing as a global flood water event that they don't even want to go down that rabbit hole sometimes.
Yeah, that just shows philosophical bias to the data. Now, that's so fascinating. So that's exactly the type of thing we would expect, the long-distance sediment transport. Now, what we're looking at here is all the different sedimentary layers of the Grand Canyon. So what can you tell us about these? Do we find any of these layers widespread around North America and beyond? Or?
Yes, absolutely we do. Some of these layers are found throughout this entire region, crossing multiple states. Some of these layers, as we'll talk about in a little bit, actually go much further than that. But the diagram that we see here, if you look at it, Caleb, the horizontal layers that we see stacked up here, from the Kaibab limestone, kind of the rim rock of the Grand Canyon, down to the Tapeats sandstone, are all kind of flat and horizontal, we see there. Those are layers that we believe were deposited or laid down during this year-long flood in Noah's day, okay? And then underneath that, you can kind of see some tilted, angled rock layers, okay? You begin to go down there, you see the Cardenas, which is actually a basalt lava flow layer. From there all the way down to the Bass limestone, you can see that kind of tilted purplish layer. These are kind of tilted and angled layers, what we refer to as the Grand Canyon supergroup. Now, when we examine these layers, there's some really interesting things that come out here, Caleb. The layers that we look at, the sedimentary layers, the tilted layers, and the flat layers on top, we begin to examine them and we realize that there's a major difference between the two.
Yeah.
Not only are they at a different angle, geologists refer to that kind of contact point, that angle where they come together, as the Great Unconformity, where that Tapeats sandstone sits on top of the layers in the sediment and some of the basement rocks underneath there. They refer to that as an unconformity because the layers don't conform to each other and thereby they don't conform in time. They would say there's millions of years of missing time, as we'll talk about in a minute. But the other thing that we find here that's really interesting is we find that basically from the Tapeats sandstone up to the Kaibab limestone, we find a huge amount of fossils, okay? Rapidly dead and buried things, basically.
Wow.
The fossil record is found in an explosive, existence from the Tapeats sandstone all the way up to the Kaibab limestone. But underneath that, the Grand Canyon supergroup layers, those tilted angled layers, they do not contain the fossil record to any great extent. We typically don't find anything beyond, things like stromatolites, which are kind of blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, mats that basically grow in calm and placid seas where a little bacteria colony grows, sand comes on top of it and kind of gets on top, and they kind of grow up through that sand. So it kind of creates this layered, very thin layered of basically blue-green bacteria and sand or rock, so it basically creates a almost like a mushroom-shaped rock, you can see. But those are the evidence and result of typical calm and placid seas. What we don't find in the Bass limestone all the way up until we get to the Tapeats sandstone, what we don't find, Caleb, are big, dead, and buried things of highly advanced, complex life forms. Life suddenly seems to explode into existence, they say, at that Tapeats sandstone. And it's what we refer to as the Cambrian explosion, or the Cambrian explosion of life, that you may have heard about.
Right.
And it is one of the largest mysteries to evolutionary biologists around the world. I mean, second only to how did life get its start? We still can't figure that out from that perspective. But looking at this, it's a worldwide physical feature, Caleb. Worldwide, we find basically no fossils, no fossils, no fossils, no fossils. Then boom, an explosion within the fossil record that represents nearly every major phyla of life known to man instantaneously.
Wow.
Basically going from no life to highly developed and complex life without steady, gradual evolutionary precursors to it. It's basically as if life suddenly exploded into existence, they say. And there are many shows and models and papers that they try to explain how that could have happened. One of my favorite ones recently, Caleb, actually came out, I think maybe 2 years ago I read it. They talked about maybe another proposal to how we have this worldwide explosion within the fossil record. And what they say is it appears from the fossil record and from geology around the world, we must have had some big major water event that swept over the continents and dumped all kinds of sediment and nutrients into the oceans. And that sediment bloom basically created an algal bloom and a life bloom within the oceans, that these small little things that were living in the ocean suddenly had all the nutrients and things available to bloom into existence and to become highly developed life forms. Now, they tie that into a basically worldwide water event sweeping over the continents. I love it. But it's interesting. They're only found going up one side of slope always going uphill, and never found going downhill on the backside. Now, that cannot be explained, I believe, in a secular model very easily.
Right.
But if you look at what the flood is doing, the flood is, bringing on water and currents. Animals and creatures are trying to escape to high ground. So they're climbing up these dunes to get to high ground. Once they get to the top of that dune, the current of water behind them, and now Caleb, is pushing them over the top of that dune. They're landing on the bottom of the next dune, and they start climbing up that dune, or they're getting pushed aside. In many cases, we have examples where animals
these things too. And what we believe these are parabolic recumbent folds, and this particular one it's about 20 feet from top to bottom. It's huge. And so a parabola is, if I can use this little index card here, parabola, if you guys remember in geometry, is kind of this U-shaped fold, right? And so when a geologist sees a fold on its side like this, we call it a recumbent fold. And so these are parabolic folds because they're shaped like a parabola, and they're recumbent because they're laying on their sides. And I actually had a picture of this fold on a poster at a geology conference I was presenting at. Geologist came up and said, "Oh, parabolic recumbent folds, aren't those, so cool?" And he started talking about them and so forth and how amazing they were. And then he looked up at the title of my poster and said, "Coconino sandstone. Those can't be parabolic recumbent folds. The coconino is windblown." The point being that parabolic recumbent folds only form underwater. And so what happens is you get the angled crossbeds like this, a current will come along and actually flip the crossbed over. And so these folds form as the sediments are being laid down.
Various ways that New Age teachings have even come into the church. And so I'm really excited about today's episode. So it's good to have you back, Marcia.
Hi, Caleb and Danny. It's really great to be back. And I have a lot to say today. So
all right, yeah. Well, let's get into it. That's great. That's great. So let's first make this distinction here. There's the term New Age and occult. Now, I think there's some similarities, but maybe a difference. If you could break that down for us.
Yes, that's a good place to start. They do overlap in many ways, but I define them differently. I define the New Age as a network of beliefs that primarily come from three different sources: Eastern religions, Gnostic beliefs, and a movement called New Thought that was very prominent in the 19th and early 20th centuries and still exists. So those are the three kind of main influences and roots of the New Age. And the New Age.
So your website is also, correct me if I'm wrong, coldcasechristianity.com, right?
That's right.
Awesome. And I think your approach is really attracted to many people because it's unique as far as the field of apologetics, making the case for Christianity and responding to objections, because you're coming at it from a detective angle. And I know for my wife Kendra that was appealing. because, well, her mom also watches detective shows as well. And that was, I think that was the first, Cold Case Christianity was the first book, apologetics book your mom read, right?
And I think so. I'm actually sure.
We have to, those of us who uphold a more conservative, historic Christian framework, we have to be having these conversations. We have to lead the way. Otherwise, it's going to be led by people who adopt critical theory or critical race theory, and it's going to spiral or continue to spiral in this framework of, oppressed and oppressor. Yeah. And that's not okay. Too many people are being injured by that, Black and white, and everything in between. Relationships are being lost. And so, we need to have stake in this game. We need to be using our voice to speak into this space. And if we're not, we're missing a huge opportunity for souls and to speak truth.
Amen. So you don't have to get behind the hashtag or the organization to be involved. I want to kind of really close out encouraging people, if the Lord leads you, that you guys would consider supporting Monique's ministry, the Center for Biblical Unity. It's just to go.
We may not really know as much about how fossils are preserved as we think. Before she found this, they had no question in their minds. They understood how fossils are preserved. It was no doubt. Yeah. All of a sudden now, we must not really understand fossils, because this has got to be 68 million years old. The dog ate my homework mentality, the lame excuso profusion that came out of this was delightful to a creationist. Look at this now. This was an article by Helen Fields in Smithsonian Magazine a year after she made the discovery. Schweitzer's work is showing us we don't really understand decay. So not only do we thought we knew about how fossils form, we also don't understand we never really understood how things rot. Wow. So now we gotta figure out how things rot, because obviously anything but admit that we don't understand how old these fossils are. We got to say we don't really understand fossils anymore. We don't really understand rotting anymore, or decomposition or decay. Anything but admit the time frame that the face value of this new data, this new discovery would prove. It's very, very difficult. Look at this, is interesting. In that same Discover magazine article, it said it's a matter of faith now, faith among scientists that soft tissue can survive. It's a matter of faith that soft tissue can survive at most a few tens of thousands of years, but not 65 million years. So it's a real conflict. There wasn't any science to back up that what they were seeing could fit the time frame, but they were so married to the time frame, and still are, that they aren't able. They just aren't able. Now, this is Jeffrey Beta from the Scripps Oceanographic Institute. Look at what he says. He's an organic chemist, and he says he can't imagine soft tissue surviving millions of years. He says the cellular material that Schweitzer found must be contamination from outside sources. That was his whole thing. It can't really be part of the dinosaur's body. That was one of the evolutionist spins on this. But look at what he said here. Even if the T-Rex had died in a colder, drier climate than the Hell Creek Formation in the Badlands of Montana, environmental radiation would have degraded the body, Beta says. Bones absorb uranium and thorium like crazy. You've got an internal dose of radiation that will wipe out the biomolecules. Just the radiation, the mild amount of radiation that would result from the bones seeking uranium and thorium in the natural sediments and natural strata, minerals, would have destroyed the biomolecules long before 68 million years, he's saying. And so his excuse is, well, it's not part of the dinosaur's body. We'll find out later that it was investigated, tried over and over and over again. They tested it, and it was nascent or native to the dinosaur's body. Isn't it sad how some people's grip on their lives is so precarious that they'll embrace any preposterous delusion rather than face an occasional bleak truth? Like the paradigm of deep time might not be true.
But I've heard you mention, and several other scientists mentioned, the mature galaxies and cosmological principle. So that has implications on the light travel problem and also the age of the universe as well. So maybe we can talk about mature galaxies. So what is? Because a lot of scientists are saying when we look at the stars at night, we're seeing stars from billions of years ago. But do you think that's actually the case, though?
I don't. The Bible indicates that God created the entire universe thousands of years ago, and there's a couple different issues there we can discuss. There's the prediction of the secularists that distant galaxies should just be starting to. You should see galaxies in the process of formation, and that's not what we see in the distant universe. We've taken the Hubble Space Telescope, pointed out there's the Hubble Deep Field, there's the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, about as far out as we can look into space. And you'll find fully designed galaxies there. Spiral galaxies, looks like they're even wrapped, similar to ones nearby. And some will say, well, there are systematic differences. And I'll grant there are some differences, but that's okay. It doesn't. The fact is, these galaxies are not in the process of formation. They're fully designed already at distances that were really surprising. The Hubble Deep Field was shocking to secularists to see these fully designed galaxies at distances where they thought they should just be starting to form. They're not just starting to form. They're there. And they're fully designed. They're mature galaxies at these tremendous distances. So that's a problem for the secular view.
Now, false ideas, they have consequences, right? False ideas are powerful and it lies to you about reality. Another example is 2,000 years ago, there was a man named Paul who at the time believed that Jesus was not God. He was not the Messiah who had risen from the dead. And that led him to persecute Christians. But then he encountered the truth and he realized he was believing a lie, and he encountered the truth that Jesus had and truly was risen from the dead. And then he devoted the rest of his life towards proclaiming that Jesus is the risen Savior. And so he daily reasoned with people, showing that Jesus fulfilled prophecies that were written hundreds of years before he was born as a man. And he reasoned with people, showing that there was eyewitness testimony, that people weren't just making up stuff. He reasoned, showing that Jesus in his life, death, and resurrection actually solved humanity's greatest need. See, Paul, when he would go into Athens, he was provoked by false ideas, not only for love for people, but a passion that they would know the truth and that the lies would not cripple them. See, I lead a citywide ministry called Engage Apologetics, and I, likewise, am provoked that others would know the truth. The total truth of Christianity. We have people in our city who have bought into lies that Jesus is not God. Different religious groups actually believe that, and they have a false view of Jesus. We have people that believe that their life is an accident over many years of an evolutionary process, and there are consequences for believing that, and that your life ultimately has no purpose. So we have great goals to train people and train believers to confidently engage with others on the truth through weekly training, online training, and evangelism teams. But we need your support to help us do that.